Before we begin, a few words about this channel. Forgotten Women of History is dedicated to the women who shaped the world but were erased from its memory. Every story here is built on verified historical facts, and every story is told slowly, softly, so that if sleep finds you along a few way, you can let it come. Now, imagine a castle of Vilnius, deep in the Lithuanian night. The guard whisper about a pale figure leading through the corridors. A woman in black, a queen who died 500 years ago, but never left. Her name was Barbara Radziwiłł. She won the love of the king, who defied his mother, his count, and his international to crown her. And for that love, she was destroyed. This is her story.
On December 6, 1520, winter came early to Vilnius. The wind howled through the chimneys like a hungry wolf, and snow draped the city in a white shroud, as if nature itself sensed that on this day a girl would be born whose destiny would be woven from love and death in equal measure. Her father, Jerzy Hercules Radziwiłł, did not bear his thunderous nickname for nothing. His influence rivaled that of his mythological namesake, though his exploits required not so much physical strength as political cunning. The girl was named Barbara. Bending over her cradle were not paupers whispering prayers for a crust of bread, but powerful relatives plotting decades into the future. But there was a secret in this bloodline, one whispered about in dark corners of the court. Little Barbara's great-grandmother, the legendary Elizabeth of Pilica, had once captured the heart of King Władysław II, Jagiełło himself. Wicked tongues called her a witch, for to certain aristocrats, love without dynastic calculation seemed something otherworldly and unclean. Elizabeth had managed not only to enchant the monarch, but to briefly ascend the Polish throne, provoking such hatred that every step she took was suspected of sorcery. And then she died suddenly, as if fate, too generous for a moment, had immediately reclaimed its gift. The blood of a witch queen flowed in little Barbara's veins, and while no one could yet imagine how mirror-like the fates of great-grandmother and great-granddaughter would prove, the same forbidden love for a king, the same fury of the nobility, the same crown paid for in life itself, all of it waited ahead, hidden behind the veil of years, like winter Vilnius behind a curtain of snow. For now Barbara grew. She grew under the steady protection of her father and elder brother Mikołaj the Red, in whose almost tender nickname seemed charming until you remembered it belonged to a man with a will capable of bending iron. She studied languages, music, poetry, and the art of courtly conversation. Contemporaries, holding their breath, whispered about her beauty, comparing it now to dawn, now to a sunset stained the color of blood. Tall, slender, with dark hair and eyes that danced with sparks, she was too beautiful, indecently, dangerously beautiful. They called her the Pearl of Lithuania, and it was no mere courtly compliment. When Barbara turned 17, it was time for marriage. Not travel, not self-discovery. Marriage, beauty, intelligence, and immense wealth. A combination that could turn a girl's life into a fairy tale or into a well-calculated strategic move. The choice fell upon Stanisław Gasztowt, son of a powerful Lithuanian magnate and voivode of Nowogródek. The young man was 13 years older than his bride, by the standards of the era, almost an ideal difference. He was young, rich, influential, and not unhandsome. But love never came. Stanisław looked at his new wife, at her noble birth, her remarkable beauty, her sharp mind, and remained utterly indifferent, as if before him stood not one of the most brilliant brides of the duchy, but merely another line on a list of obligations. Barbara made no scenes. She did not weep into her pillow. She simply thought, I deserve better. And who knows, perhaps it was then that a dream first stirred in her mind, a dream destined to come true in the most tragic way imaginable. The spouses lived together, but without feeling each occupied with their own affairs. Then fate decided to hurry things along. First, Barbara's powerful father-in-law, Albertas Gasthaud, died, then her mother-in-law, and third, Stanisław himself in 1542. 3 deaths in quick succession. The court began to whisper, which, with knowing looks, behind her back. Barbara paid little attention to wagging tongues. After all, in society's opinion, she was far from the first witch in her family line. She was just past 20. She was young, free, and unimaginably wealthy. The entire Gasthaud fortune passed to her. Under the laws of the time, a widow gained full legal independence. Barbara found herself in a position rare for a woman of her era. She could live as she wished, manage her estates, make her own decisions. She packed her belongings and went to her brother Mikołaj. Under his protection, a new chapter of her life awaited. A chapter she could not yet read to its end. Meanwhile, the heir to the Polish throne and Grand Duke of Lithuania, Sigismund Augustus, was living through a drama of his own. His first marriage to Elizabeth of Habsburg had been a brilliant political move and a personal catastrophe. Sigismund had fallen in love with a portrait. The young princess on canvas seemed tender and refined, but reality proved otherwise. The girl was sickly, frail, and suffered from epileptic seizures. Instead of love and passion, the marriage brought only awkwardness and a desire to avoid his own wife. His mother, Bona Sforza, an Italian from the famed Milanese dynasty, a woman of iron will and nerves of steel, was the grey cardinal of the court, imperious, calculating, ruthless. She saw in her son not a man, but an extension of her own ambitions. Sigismund had grown up in her shadow, accustomed to obeying, accustomed to yielding, melancholy, refined, prone to compromise. He seemed a man born for the quiet life of a scholar or poet, never for battle. On June 15th, 1545, Elizabeth died. The court whispered that the king was not overly grieved. Sigismund was free, but his freedom was illusory. His mother was already leafing through catalogues of European princesses, selecting a new wife for him. The nobility demanded a new dynastic marriage. Every magnate had an opinion on which alliance would best serve the Commonwealth. But Sigismund fled. He fled from Krakow to Vilnius, formally to strengthen the crown's position in the Grand Duchy, but in truth to breathe freely, far from his mother's control and the nobility's insistent demands. And there, in Vilnius, at a reception in the RADZIVILL Castle, he saw her. Barbara entered the hall and time stopped. Sigismund, who had known many women, suddenly felt something he had never known before. She was too beautiful, tall, slender, with dark hair arranged in the Lithuanian fashion, with eyes that held the dance of candlelight, and something else, something elusive and dangerous. But it was not only her beauty. Barbara carried herself with dignity, did not fawn before the king, did not try to attract attention with cheap tricks. She looked at him, not at the crown, not at the throne, but at him, a living man. and in her gaze was not fear but a challenge. "Barbara," she introduced herself, smiling slightly. "Sigismund," he murmured, forgetting that his name was known throughout Europe. They spoke the entire evening of poetry, of music, of the stars above Vilnius. She was clever, sharp, and deep at once. She laughed easily, but in her laughter rang a note of sorrow that he recognized instantly, because he carried the same one within himself. By the end of the evening, Sigismund knew his heart would never again beat for another. Their romance flared like wildfire in a dry forest. Secret meetings, notes passed through trusted servants, long walks in gardens where no one could overhear. Vilnius held a special magic capable of cloaking any passion in mystery and forbidden danger. For Sigismund, Barbara was a breath of fresh air in the stifling atmosphere of palace intrigue. For the first time in his life, he felt himself not an heir, not an instrument of others' ambitions, but simply a man in love with a woman. For Barbara, the king was no mighty monarch, but a living person, lonely, unhappy, crushed by the will of others. She saw in him what no one else saw, a strength hidden so deep that Sigismund himself did not suspect it existed. But the secret could not last forever. Rumors raced through Vilnius with the speed of wildfire. They said the king was openly courting the widow Radziwiłł, that they met alone, that an underground passage had been dug between their palaces for their trysts, and of course that she had bewitched him, a hereditary witch, the great-granddaughter of that same Elizabeth of Pilica. What further proof was needed? Barbara's brothers, Mikołaj the Red and Mikołaj the Black Moai, watched the unfolding events with the composure of seasoned players. They saw how madly the king was in love. They saw him lose his mind at a single glance from their sister. And they understood. If Barbara became merely a royal mistress, it would be a disgrace to the entire family. But if the king were to marry her, one day, both Mikołajs appeared at court. With the most embarrassed, almost saintly expressions, they bowed deeply and said, "Your Majesty, we beg you not to meet with our sister anymore. It casts a shadow upon her good name." Sigismund nearly lost his mind. Not to see her was like not breathing. He endured a few days. Those days he did not live. He existed like a shadow. He could not eat, could not sleep, could not think of anything but her. And rumors were already spreading through the court that the beautiful Barbara was attracting the attention of eligible suitors. In complete despair, driven by passion, he rushed to Barbara's castle. She met him, pale dark circles beneath her eyes, and threw herself into his arms, weeping and whispering words of love. "My brothers forbid us to meet," she sobbed, "and my soul forbids me to live without you," he cried. When Sigismund left her chambers at dawn, the two brothers were already waiting at the door with mild expressions. "Your Majesty, how can this be?" sighed Mikołaj the Red. "You promised us," picked up Mikołaj the Black. "We must marry her off, and your visits are a scandal. Who will take her to wife now?" And then, without hesitating for a second, Sigismund struck himself on the chest. "I will take her." The brothers exchanged glances. Well, that was exactly what they had wanted. In the summer of 1547, the exact date remains disputed by historians, a secret ceremony took place in one of the churches of Vilnius. Candles cast trembling shadows on the stone walls. The priest spoke quietly, almost in a whisper. Only a handful of trusted witnesses were present. Sigismund Augustus and Barbara Radziwiłł exchanged vows before God. Barbara understood what she was doing. She knew this marriage would make her a target for an entire state's hatred. But she loved and believed their love would withstand all. In that dim church, speaking her vows, she could not know what terrible price she would pay for her choice. She could not know that she was repeating the path of her great-grandmother Elizabeth, step for step, as if walking an enchanted circle. The first months after the wedding passed in fragile peace, secret spouses meeting in stolen moments, savoring brief flashes of happiness. But both knew this was the calm before the storm. On April 1st, 1548, Sigismund I the Old died. The crown passed definitively to his son, and with it the necessity of returning to Krakow and standing before the Sejm. Hiding was no longer possible. At one session of the Sejm, Sigismund rose and announced he was already married. His wife was Barbara Radziwiłł. The marriage had been contracted more than a year ago in Vilnius. The hall froze. The silence lasted several seconds and then exploded. Shouts, accusations, threats. Deputies leapt from their seats, waved their arms. Betrayal, disgrace. The witch has bewitched the king. Some openly spoke of dethronement. Threats of rebellion rang out, but the most terrifying fury was that of bona sforza. When word reached her, the Polish court trembled. She paced her chamber, spewing curses. For years she had planned dynastic strategy, negotiated with the courts of Europe, and now her son had destroyed everything for some Lithuanian widow. Bona accused Barbara of witchcraft. She demanded immediate annulment. She bribed, intimidated, intrigued. Sigismund's position was desperate. He stood alone against the entire Polish political elite, against his own mother, against a system in which the king was only first among equals. Many in his place would have broken. And here something astonishing happened. Sigismund Augustus, that same indecisive, soft, yielding Sigismund who had lived his whole life in his domineering mother's shadow, refused to submit. He refused to annul the marriage. He declared that Barbara was his lawful wife before God, that their union was blessed by the Church, and that no earthly power could dissolve what God had joined. The Sejm pressed him. Deputies held stormy sessions. Bona never ceased her intrigues. But with each passing day, the king's position grew firmer, as if pressure, instead of breaking him, was tempering him. In February 1549, at a session of the Sejm in Piotrków, a scene occurred that entered history. The deputies once again demanded explanations. The hall roared with outraged voices. It seemed Sigismund was about to break, but instead he rose. His voice was quiet but firm, like steel wrapped in velvet. "I am king by the will of God, not by your whim," he began. "I married Barbara Radziwiłł. This marriage was contracted before God and blessed by the Church. I have broken no law. My consort is a woman of noble birth, worthy and educated." And then he spoke the words that would echo through the centuries. "It is not for you to judge the purity of my conscience." The hall froze. It was unprecedented. A monarch accustomed to bowing to the will of the nobility was challenging the entire system of noble democracy. He was declaring that something stood above political calculation, that there were questions of conscience in which the Sejm had no right to meddle. The man everyone had thought weak proved stronger than them all, and the cause of that strength was love. When the Senate proposed a compromise to recognize Barbara as the king's wife but not crown her, Sigismund merely smirked. "She is my lawful queen, and our children will be lawful heirs." He accepted no half measures. He took no compromise. He wanted everything for Barbara, this or nothing, and he began to act. He distributed lands and privileges to those willing to support him. He made deals, promised offices, played on the rivalries between noble factions. It was dirty, exhausting work, but Sigismund was ready for anything. He banished his chief opponent from Krakow. His own mother, Bona, gritting her teeth, withdrew. But her hatred for Barbara only burned hotter. Slowly but surely, the king assembled a coalition. Some magnates received lavish gifts, others grew weary of conflict, still others understood. If they pushed the king to desperation, he would resort to extreme measures. The Sejm surrendered. December 7th, 1550, Wawel Cathedral in Krakow, a cold winter day. Barbara Radziwiłł, clad in royal robes, walked slowly down the central nave toward the altar. She held herself upright. Her face was pale but calm. Beside her walked Sigismund, his eyes shining with relief and pride. 3 years of struggle, 3 years of humiliation, intrigue, hatred. And now, triumph. The primate of Poland placed the royal crown upon Barbara's head. The choir sang liturgical hymns. Candles illuminated ancient frescoes. Barbara Radziwiłł, great-granddaughter of Elizabeth of Pilika, the witch queen, officially became Queen of Poland and Grand Duchess of Lithuania. The circle had closed. Great-grandmother and great-granddaughter both had captured the heart of a king, both had ascended the throne against the will of the nobility. Both were cursed by those who could not forgive their daring, but even in this moment of triumph, something was wrong. Barbara could barely stand, weakness, dizziness. She held on with her last strength, smiled, accepted congratulations. Sigismund held her hand as if afraid that if he let go, she would disappear. He did not yet know how close he was to the truth. Illness came quietly, like a thief in the night. First weakness, then pains that would not subside day or night, then a terrible swelling in her abdomen, sores on skin that had once been white and radiant, the smell of decay in the royal bedchamber. 16th century medicine was helpless. Modern historians believe it was cancer, aggressive, swift, merciless. Perhaps the disease had been developing for a long time, and the stress and humiliation of recent years had only accelerated it. But one man remained at her side, without flinching, without retreating, without looking away. Sigismund cared for her as few men ever care, even for those they love most. He did not leave for a moment. He barely ate, barely slept. He cancelled state affairs, ignored the Sejm, refused to receive ambassadors. He summoned doctors from Italy, Germany, France, offering fabulous sums for her healing. He refused to believe she could be lost. He was ready to accept her anyway, emaciated, disfigured, in agony, but only alive. Barbara saw his despair, and it tore her heart more than the illness did. She understood she was leaving. She understood that she had been queen for so short a time, that she had not managed to prove her enemies wrong, that she was repeating her great-grandmother's fate, step for step to the very end. 3 years of struggle for 5 months, Fate seemed to mock them. On May 8, 1551, in the arms of her grief-maddened husband, Barbara Radziwiłł died. She was 30 years old. She had been queen for 1 year. When she drew her last breath, Sigismund screamed. He wept like a child, refused to release her body, cried that he did not want to live. The courtiers could barely lead him away. With her, Sigismund also died. No, physically he continued to exist, but his soul had burned away with his beloved. The funeral procession from Krakow to Vilnius was one of the most extraordinary in the history of the Commonwealth. Sigismund walked on foot the entire way beside his wife's coffin, as if he hoped that by measuring the distance in steps, he could shorten the gulf between life and death. He insisted on royal honors. Barbara had been a queen, and the whole world should remember. The coffin was lowered into the crypt of Vilnius Cathedral. Sigismund bid farewell to the woman for whom he had defied an entire state. From that day, he wore only black. He ceased receiving guests. He avoided celebrations. In place of court ladies, he surrounded himself with sorcerers, alchemists, and astrologers. He sought a way to bring her back. He did not care how resurrect her, awaken her, summon at least her shadow from oblivion. It happened at Nesvizh Castle, the ancestral seat of the Radzivills. A certain magus named Twardowski, a half-legendary figure shrouded in rumors of a pact with the devil, agreed to fulfill the king's wish. He refused for a long time, warned of the danger, but Sigismund was unyielding. "Your Majesty," said the magus, drawing magical circles on the floor with chalk and charcoal, "you will see her. But remember, you must not touch her, under no circumstances. The consequences will be terrible." "Ah, I don't care," whispered the king. His eyes burned with feverish light. "I must see her, just once, just for a moment." Twardowski began to whisper incantations. The candles in the hall flickered and went out one by one. The air grew heavy, thick, as before a storm. The mirrors on the walls, two enormous Venetian mirrors set facing each other, began to shimmer from within with a strange cold light. And then mist filled the chamber, pale, dense, alive, and from it, slowly, like dawn rising over the horizon, a female figure took shape. She hovered above the floor. White robes flowed like water. Dark hair framed her face, that very face Sigismund saw every night in his dreams. She turned her head, and her gaze, tender, warm, alive, found him. Her lips curved into a shy smile, the very smile with which she had greeted him in Vilnius, the very smile for which he would have given everything. "Pasienka," Sigismund whispered. His voice broke on that word, intimate, tender, the very pet name he had used for her in their secret Vilnius nights. He stepped forward, his arms reached out to her, to this impossible, forbidden miracle. "No," cried Twardowski, "Your Majesty, no, do not touch her." But Sigismund did not hear. He saw only her, only that smile, only those eyes, alive, warm, loving, the very eyes that had closed forever in his arms in May of 51. He stretched out his hand and touched her. In that instant, the ghost transformed. The smile twisted, the beautiful face darkened, the features blurred, the white robes turned black, as if soaked in the ink of night. The figure recoiled, and from her lips burst a cry, not human, not earthly, a cry in which pain, fury, and infinite longing all blended into one. And then silence, emptiness, snuffed candles, and the king on his knees in the middle of the dark hall, reaching out into nothing. Twardowski said nothing. He knew what had been done could not be undone. The touch of the living upon the dead is a violation of a law as ancient as death itself. And now Barbara would never find peace. She would remain forever between worlds, neither living nor dead, bound to the earth by a love that had proven stronger than the grave. Thus was born the Black Lady of Nesvizh. From that night on, a ghost in a black dress began to appear in the corridors of Nesvizh Castle. Not every day, not every year, but always, before disaster. They say she was seen on the eve of wars and fires, before deaths and betrayals. She appeared soundlessly, a tall female figure in mourning robes, her face veiled. Sometimes she simply stood at the end of a long gallery, gazing at the one fated to suffer. Sometimes she passed through walls, leaving behind the scent of withered roses and a cold that snuffed out candles. The Radzivills, a proud and practical line, did not fear her. To them, the Black Lady was no curse but a guardian, their own Barbara, who even after death continued to watch over her family. They told their children stories of her not as something terrifying, but as part of the family legend, sad but full of love. The centuries passed. The castle was rebuilt, burned, restored. Generations of Radzivills came and went. The borders of states shifted. The Commonwealth was partitioned, Lithuania and Poland swallowed by empires, then born again, then lost again. But the Black Lady remained, unchanging, like memory itself. She was reportedly last seen in 1939, on the eve of the Second World War, when Nesvizh was occupied by Soviet troops and the last Radzivills fled westward. They say a sentry standing guard at the castle gates saw a woman in black walking slowly across the bridge over the moat. He called out to her. She turned, and he saw a face of such beauty and such sorrow that he dropped his rifle. When he bent to pick it up, the woman was gone. Perhaps it is true. Perhaps it is a beautiful invention. But does it matter? Sigismund Augustus died on July 7th, 1572. He was 52, the last of the Jagiellons, that great dynasty which had ruled from the Baltic to the Black Sea. With his death, a line stretching back nearly 2 centuries was severed forever. He never produced an heir. His 2 subsequent marriages, to Catherine of Austria and then to Catherine Jagiellon, were empty and cold. Sigismund performed his marital duty without soul, without fire, without that passion which had once driven him to defy an entire state. For the rest of his life he wore mourning, 21 years in black, for a woman who had been his queen for only 5 months. For 21 years he commissioned masses for the repose of her soul. For 21 years he kept her portraits, her letters, her belongings. For 21 years he woke in the middle of the night, reaching out toward the empty side of the bed. Historians debate, was his choice a mistake? Was love for Barbara worth the end of a dynasty? Was it worth the political crisis that fractured the Commonwealth? Was it worth 21 years of solitude? But these are questions asked by those who have never loved as Sigismund loved. And Barbara, what remained of her, the real living woman of flesh and blood, a legend remained. The Black Lady wandering the corridors of Nesvizh remained. Poems and paintings, operas and films remained. A name that every Pole and every Lithuanian knows remained. A story told to children remained about a woman who was too beautiful, too proud, and too deeply loved for her era. She reigned for 5 months. 5 months between coronation and death, between triumph and tragedy, between the gold of the crown and the blackness of the grave. But those 5 months proved more important than decades of other reigns, because Barbara Radziwiłł proved something that no general, no diplomat, no sage could ever prove, that love, real, reckless, ready to sacrifice everything, can alter the course of history, not conquer death, no, but alter history. And perhaps somewhere in the dark corridors of Nesvizh Castle, on those nights when the moon hides behind the clouds and the wind howls in the old chimney flues, a tall woman in a black dress is still waiting, waiting for the one who once dared to reach out and touch her across the abyss between life and death. The one who loved her more than fear, more than duty, more than reason. The one who could never let her go. And she, him, the end.